Now that we have covered the exercise and we walked through the dashboard and covered the steps on that dashboard, we also have some of the slides that walk you back through some of the use cases we covered. The cell as object, what it returns. The column as object, it returns the array of values. And the row as object, returning an array of an array, which is not an expected syntax. Cell as string, very similar. And let's go cover some of the sample use cases. One of the most covered use case is dynamically binding the group by and the measure of a step. Now this previously used to be accomplished through creating a static step that emits the value I'm trying to bind for the target step with the group and the measure. Something to note, if you're doing the dynamic grouping measure chart, since the release 2.12, we have a new column map in the JSON that we need to manually update to null. So again, this is specific only for the dynamic grouping and measure. Now, before diving deep into this use case, I want to point out that there is an easier approach using dashboard pages. So using dashboard pages, you can do pretty much the same. Keep a note, the dashboard pages are limited to 20, and there are some use cases where you still might want to go to do the binding this way. So the use case we're talking about is pretty simple. We have one chart, and when I click on account type, I want to see group by account type and the count of rows, for example. When I click on account industry, I want to see account industry. And actually, I want to see sum of amount. So in this screenshot, actually think about it. I want to see sum of amount here. So change the metric and change the group by section. This walks you through creating the dynamic group, creating the dashboard. You can freeze the screen if you want to follow with the exercise, but pretty much the exercise is going to be something like this. So we are going to create. I'm going to stay and save in case I change something. Don't forget to save the bindings 101. You will need that dashboard for your later on discovering more about bindings. So create a dashboard, blank dashboard. You can use the op owner account or any data set you have that has account type and account industry. Few things, once you go into bindings, you want to pay attention to the step names you are using. So you can call this, for example, in this case, my step, and leave it count of rows. Go to bars and change this, for example, to type, account type. Actually, let's do sum of amount. Now, the reason I wanted to keep it count of rows, just to know, actually, let me keep it count of rows to show you something. Account type, there you go, that's my step. Also, I'm going to need a toggle. I'm going to need a static step. So this first time we are going to go to create a step. And this is a static step. The values is group by. So use please group space by, capital G, just so that when we copy paste the syntax, it's easier. Display, let's say we want to say here type. And the value should be exactly what the group by section of that step is expecting. So pretty much we need to use the API names of the fields in the data set. In this case, it is called account capital ID dot type. So these are important. Capital I, capital T. And industry is called account, or the API name is dot industry. Notice we were only able to add a value, one value, display and a value. So if I create this static step and I grab a toggle, grab the static step, put it here, grab my step, and this is the chart we are trying to dynamically bind to the group by. Now, save this. Before you start editing JSON, always save this. You can say dynamic group binding. And let's go Control E, Command E to look at the dashboard. So you can see, if you scroll down, there's the steps, group by right here. This is the static step. It's called static flex right here. And the values, type and account type. The other step is called my step underscore one. Yes, the system name, API name is underscore, is added automatically. But more importantly, look at count star like this. Count comma star, that's count all. And the group by is account ID dot type. So this is where we are going behind the scene to bind the groups back to the static step so it behaves dynamically. Now, two things. First, because we are binding the group by or even the measure, those are required fields. They cannot be empty. So when you select the toggle, you have to go to the step and make this single selection required so that the user cannot choose or forgets not to choose one of the values so that it doesn't error out. The binding does not error out due to it being null. Of course, you can use coalesce, but again, that's a longer approach. Again, save this. The second thing is, because I am going to bind dynamically the group by or the measure of this step, then for this step and only for this step, I need to change the column maps to null. And to show that, I'm going to drag any other chart and put it here. And just call it, so for example, do not change the column map here. So this step, I'm not gonna touch. So before changing the binding the group by and the sum, or the metric later on, we are going to go Control E. And for the step that we want to change, not the do not change the column, so I can collapse this. It's this step. There are two places. For this group by, if I scroll down, keep scrolling down. Sorry, for the my step one right here, my step one, scroll down. You are going to find a column map section right here, the column map section. This one, easiest way is to hit this arrow, delete by the back button, delete button, and type null. This is step one under the widget. Under the step. Step one to make the column map null under the target step called my step one. Now, if you recall from previous chapters, this step is being used by another widget, which is the bar chart. And we don't have necessarily the name here. It was in the UI. I'll show it to you in a bit. But you can control copy my step, control find my step where it is. This is the step definition. This step also is mentioned under the widget using that step. So find it again. Here it is under the widget using that step, which is called chart underscore one. So under chart one also, there's going to be a column map right here. So this column map needs to be changed. And again, easiest way is to hit the collapse, delete this, put null. Now that I've done this, hit done, and nothing changes from a UI perspective, but I prepped it. I'm going to hit save. And just to explain why we did it in two places, it is essentially just required under the widget, but just for safety, let's do it in both places so they both match. Why these are repeated in two places? It's a widget property, it's a column map, because remember when you create a step, for example, when you are in this mode, this is a step, but also you're specifying some of the widget, how it looks like, what chart, what some of the properties. So when you hit done and you drag and drop it, or if it's already in a chart container or in a chart widget, it's gonna copy those from the step section and populate them under the widget section. That's why they exist in two places. Now that we have updated the column map to null, we are ready to bind the group by. So what we want to do is remember the static step name, which is called group underscore by underscore one. And the step has these fields, the value. And I'm trying to bind my step, the group by section here. So one of the binding syntaxes that can work is just something like, again from the slides, column, from that step, selection, the value we're passing as object. So let me try typing this on the fly. Column. This is where you want to be careful copying it from somewhere. This is group. It's called group by. Still, I use the same naming, comma, or dot selection, comma, square bracket, escape, double quote. It's called value, escape, double quote. Close this, dot as object, empty brackets, double curly brackets. So one more time, column, group by selection, comma value, dot as object. Column, from the group by, I am reading value, dot as object. No commas, it's the last one under query. So now if I hit done and I go to preview, now it's by type. If I go to industry, there you go, it's by industry. And that's how I accomplish simply the dynamic behavior. Now what folks like about static steps is I can manually go behind the scene and now bind more than that. Because that step is being selected, I can fire many values for many different use cases. So I can go back to group by. Under this value, I was not able in the UI, but I can do this. I can put comma and put another value. Let's say V2 or no, yeah, V2 or value 2. And let's say I want to update the metric. Now, if you recall, the metric, the measure section had a specific construct, which is something like this. Let's say the count, for example, was count, comma, star. If you recall, it had something like this. Now, granted, it was ordered something like this, if I recall correctly. It doesn't matter, but this is how you want to put it, count, star. Since you used V2 here, you can add it here, comma 2, and change this, for example, to actually sum, comma, of amount. Again, the reason I know this, just if you group by sum of amount and go behind the scenes to the JSON, you are going to see sum of amount. So now when the user clicks on type, they're going to fire two values, one like this and one for the count, and again, value and V2. And it's up to us as designers to listen or use these values anywhere we want, anywhere where they work. So if I hit done, again, nothing's going to change. But I'm going to go behind the scene and look for my step. And this time, I'm going to update the measure. Look how it looks like, again, from the count star. I'm going to copy all of this and actually make this dynamic. Again, shows you the power of bindings. I mean, they are a little bit of an advanced section of the product, but they are very powerful. So again, now I'm listening to V2. I change the measure according to the group. So if I go and hit done, type shows me count of rows, industry shows me sum of amount. And that is very powerful. Now that is one way to accomplish this. And let's save this dashboard, save it. So before I show you the next easy one, just remember you have the slides. Remember the column map, we only updated for the target widget, the target step, not everything else on the dashboard. This walks you how to locate where it's being used. So you can search for it, or you can just use the method I use, searching for the name, easily locates it. And again, this is where we are adding the measure with one click. Now the other way to do it is just to use dashboards with pages. So we are going to solve something similar, but on top of that, we are actually going to change the chart, which you're not going to be able to use with the binding, using the binding of the group and the measure. So this is easier here to do it this way with the dynamic group through the dashboard pages. So this is the steps that I'm going to walk you through, how to create the pages, how to update them, and I'm going to do this next right here. So save this dashboard, close it, create now a new dashboard again, create a blank dashboard, and there's a little bit of text editing or cosmetics here to mimic that effect. So first I'm going to grab a text and I'll call this type. And since it is as if someone has selected this, I'm going to change the widget style to dark gray or light gray. And yep, that should be fine. The other thing, I'm going to add a link that I will use later. And this would be the second page. So this is a link. And call this, in our case, it was industry. We will link it later once we have another page, but modify the text to match the first one. And the size 20. There you go. Now, I'm going to grab a chart. That's the other way to create it. And you can say, for example, this chart based on the same data set. This is type and group by type. And count of rows. And in this case, let's actually do a donut in this case. Remember that color from previous exercises through the fields or XMD. All right, that's my first page. I'm going to call this page from here, rename as type. Now I'm going to create a brand new page and call it industry. Same thing, I'm going to grab a text, but this time the text is on this side and the link is on this side. The text says industry and it is as if it's being selected. So background is light gray. Now this one will go back to type. Now since I have the both pages, it will go to a page in layout. It's going to go back to type, modify the style, dark blue and size 20. And grab a chart. This is another chart. Again, it's another page. This one, we can group by industry. And sum of amount, call it industry. And there you go. One more thing is going back to the type page. This industry should be linked now to the industry page. And let's see the actual effect. If you preview this, it's the same effect. I click on type, it's type, and it's even a different chart. If I go to industry, it's dollars and group by industry. So save this as dynamic, for example, grouping, and it is much more, but using pages, let's say. So both methods kind of accomplish the same. There are use cases where you might want to go the advanced route through the binding. Just pay attention to the column map. If it's an easy use case, if it's the level of the project just can be achieved with this using pages, I really encourage you to use this solution instead. I'm going to close this, go back to the slides. Here's another use case where I'm just going to walk you through it. You can use the exercise, but in this case, we are passing the values of static step to a cycle step, based step. Now, all what you need to remember, it's pretty much the same in same concept. The only difference is you are going to use as equality. So if you look at the syntax, it's listening to the static step. What are you selecting? And then you are selecting cell from that select stage, for example, and you're passing it as equality to filter stage name. Now to a completely different use case where bindings are still needed. This is not going to be solved through pages, for example. And in this use case, we are going to go back to the first dashboard we designed, where we had a goal, a reference line that said goal, and it had a static 5 million as value. A use case could be, we don't want the 5 million, we want that reference line to interact with our selections. Maybe it shows the average amount of the opportunities. So we want that value to dynamically reflect. Also, for visual perspective, smart design, we want it to reflect the industry being selected. So this exercise walks you through how you can dynamically go back to the goal and the value and dynamically update them to listen to what are you selecting on the dashboard. Now, you don't have to create this dashboard from scratch. If you still have the dashboard from the previous chapter, we are going to directly go there and use that to update the label and the value. You can also use op owner account or my ops data or my ops DS if you want, as long as it has some account industry and some opportunity amount. We are going to go right now to that dashboard. So go back to that dashboard we called opportunity dashboard. This dashboard had a reference line, goal, and it also had an amount by industry right here. So first I want goal to update to the average amount of whatever my selections are. So I need a step. Edit this, create a step, same data set, important, same data set of the other widgets. So they are all using op owner account. Call this, for example, my AVG. I'm going to use my AVG step. I'm going to use capital letters. This is important because we are going manual. Now this might not be exactly like in the slides, but again, just go with the flow of the exercise right now. My capital AVG step, and it's going to add _1. This step is going to calculate just the average amount. It's on the same data set, so whatever you select is going to interact with it. Another important thing to keep in mind, if we briefly go to the cycle, look at the metric being emitted by this step or provided. AVG small letters _ AMOUNT. So go back, leave it like this, and hit done. The step is sitting here. I don't want it to show on the dashboard. I don't want the users to know about it or they cannot interact with it. So the bindings that I'm going to use to listen to this are obviously going to be a result binding. Now, one of the easiest way to determine where is this goal 5 million, instead of tracking it by the widget name and going to find the goal name and reference. And by the way, just a tip, if we had created the step before and you have specified the reference line during the step creation, which we did not do. When we created the step, we just created the amount and the sum name. We did not specify the goal. We waited till we dragged it to the dashboard. Then we put the reference line. This means reference line, goal, and 5 million exist only one time on the dashboard. But if you were in the step and you added the reference line from here, and then you dragged the step and dropped it, when you go to Command E and search for goal, for example, you're going to find it in two places. One under the step, one under the widget, and it is under the widget that is the one you want to update. In our dashboard, this one, there's only one place. There's nothing. One place is listed, and it is under the widget called chart _1. Again, I go to goal. This is where I'm trying to update. Search for it right here. I'm going to zoom in. So in this case, before goal, I need to update 5 million to something dynamic. So I have a step emitting that. So let's go again. Let's see, for example, let me check if it is on the original file. So there should be a file listed on the same URL where you are going to see advanced exercise syntax files. If you scroll up, if you don't find it under this file, it should be under the file called syntax for the use case examples. So this will also be a file called syntax for the use case examples. Choose that file. Whoops. And syntax open. And if you scroll down to this file, you should find it under dynamic grouping, dynamic measure binding right here. Right here. Should be on line 57 and 59 on this file. Syntaxes. Again, this is the file called syntax for the use case examples. So if you see the value is again the same cell. In this case, we are going to switch the step name. This is not the right step name that we used. I can modify it here, for example, and what I used was my AVG step. It's a result. It's listening for average amount. This is what we verified, and it is as string. So you can copy this without the whole thing, the value right here. Go back to your dashboard, and instead of 5 million, again, I could have written manually, but even if you've been working with binding for a while, just make sure you're using a syntax sometimes that you copy pasting from somewhere, working syntax, because sometimes we forget a dot or a comma, etc. So again, this is going to listen to my average step, my AVG step somewhere. My AVG step is on this. Oh, it has _1, so that was a good catch. So it is _1. Result, average amount is in that step, and then as string. Now in the compact form, just to let you know, the compact form writes my average. If you look at the average amount, it's written in this way, but actually the metric is called AVG _amount, just to keep also track of all these small tips. So I updated the value. So when I go now hit done, I expect this to dynamically update. And just by looking at it, it changed from 5 million. Again, so if I click on Oregon, for example, notice how this shifts a little bit. And for Washington, again, it's shifting. Okay. Now, the next part of the exercise is I want, when I click on energy down, for this to update to say energy. Again, it's a similar exercise. What I need to do is to listen to this step and what is the field selection. So this step name is very important. I click on the widget, I look at the step name, it's called amount by industry _1. So I need to remember this. Control copy this, go back to your file, and on line 57 it's saying listen to account ID industry _1. I need to change this to this. And let me take this back here. So it's amount by industry _1 dot selection, because the user has to select energy, has to select something there. Listen to account industry value. Now, if there's nothing selected, and that's optional, I said coalesce replace by all industries and as string. Now that I've done this here, you can control copy, go back to your dashboard, Control E, control find goal, which is right here. Replace the whole goal with that syntax. Remove the comma. Again, this is listening to a step on this dashboard called amount by industry. Once the user hits selection, it's going to pass that value, and that will be my label. So if I hit done, go to preview, scroll down, look now, I didn't select anything. It says all industries. If I hit energy, it updates to energy. If I hit banking, updates to banking, and so on. So this is a very cool, nice, smart design feature to being able to dynamically update these labels based on the other selections. A final thing to this is sometimes folks ask for the value to display. So you can actually, once you go in here as a string, you can copy this whole value inside the double quotes. So I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to copy inside the double quotes from the curly brackets to curly brackets, control copy the value, and here I can put some space. I can actually add any text I want of and paste the next binding. So it's just again like a string. This will evaluate to industry, and this will say of, and this is the amount from the average step. So when I hit done, scroll down. In case you don't see the value, that means there's not enough space for it. So for example, let me zoom out, push some of the things down just to see it. Obviously, when you're designing, you take that into consideration. Maybe it's a horizontal reference. Move these things down. And now, if I expand it, I see the value right here. 82294. Now, again, this is the value. Again, if I select energy of this value, if you need to round this value, one of the easiest way, we're going to cover cycle later on, but one of the easiest way, just because it's a hidden step, nobody's using it, it's right here, average amount, right? I can just go to the step, edit it, simply go to cycle. I could do this also in compare table, but I can add round, average, comma, 0. Just run it. Already it took that. So round this, update, and look at the number. Already it's showing that it's not showing any decimals. And that's how you bind the dynamic reference or the dynamic reference line, both values and label. Save this, keep it as reference, keep the dashboard. Now, if you don't have the dashboard, like I said, you could have built this just from amount by industry and a group by opportunity name, for example, here.